Hello, welcome back to Inflection Point Conversations. I'm Michelle Obeda. I'm a 3D artist and the host of this podcast. I'll be chatting with different people who are experts in various CGI fields. Together, we'll take a deep dive into one or more of the disruptive topics that have reached an inflection point in the industry. If you're enjoying this podcast, please take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe. You can also comment and give feedback. I'd love to reach more people and grow this amazing community. Today, I'm talking with Diana Diriwaechter. Diana is an artist, educator, and CG specialist with over 25 years of industry experience. She's worked across a wide range of disciplines, including post-production, medical simulation, animated feature films, and games. Diana spent over 18 years at Blue Sky Studios, where her material work was recognized twice with VES nominations for her character work on Rio and Rio 2. She's also been an educator teaching at NYU and SVA with a strong focus on the intersection of CG and storytelling. Diana served as post-secondary director at Epic Games, supporting educators and students worldwide in integrating real-time technology into creative and technical workflows. She's currently a full-time professor of VFX and virtual production at the Savannah College of Art and Design. Welcome, Diana.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I met you at Epic Games event. I think like Epic, some kind of like a bunch of different times at different Epic Games events, which has been great. And now you've been what 5 months at the Savannah.
Yeah, it's
Savannah
just about, no, oh my gosh. Yeah, it's about 4 months now,
four
total.
months.
Yeah,
Yeah. How
approximately.
is that going?
It's going really well. I mean, it was a huge shift for me. So I was living and working in New York, and this opportunity came up. And I'm a SCAD alumni, so I always loved SCAD. I actually loved going to school here. I loved living here at the time, but it's been, 30 years. So
Yeah.
I definitely had to take a beat and be like, wait, okay, move from New York to Savannah, Georgia. Is it the same? Do I still like it? Big shift.
Yeah.
I love, I love teaching, I love experimenting, and this just seemed like a very healthy environment for both those things.
And how long have so to take it back, you worked at Blue Sky. I love you're repping your Blue Sky sweatshirt. So you worked there for like 18 years and then you went from that into working in education.
Yeah, I mean, education was always kind of part of my journey, even really from the very beginning when I was first working in post-production in New York. I started out teaching sort of someone just randomly were like, hey, we need a teacher for this training center at the time. It wasn't, it was just, kind of like an upskilling training center. And they were looking for someone, and I had never taught. And I was like, okay, that's kind of how I started. I really didn't know anything. I was just kind of thrown in there and did my best to do a good job.
Yeah.
But I realized from that moment that I really enjoyed that, that part of like,
Mm,
because what I love about teaching is you really have to understand the content, right, to be able to explain it to someone else. And it's sort of
mhm,
a weird test. It tests you,
mm.
right? Like how much well, you never
Yeah.
know everything. It does kind of test you. And I realized very quickly that I kind of enjoyed that challenge of like, do I know it well enough to then communicate that to somebody else? So I always
Mm.
on the side kind of was teaching a class here and there throughout my whole career. So it wasn't like this was over and now I'm going to teach. It was kind of always part of it, part of the journey.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's really great. Like you've been sort of using like teaching for yourself as a way of teaching yourself too. I've heard a lot of people who have gone into
Yeah.
teaching say something similar where it's like, well, I have to learn it enough to teach it, right?
And it's very creative, right? Because sometimes you think you know something, and then you tell people that and you realize, oh, they're not actually understanding it. And then you can't just
Mm.
repeat it. You have to be very creative of then how to break it down in a different way, so the
Hmm.
person then understands. So I also kind of enjoyed that communication part of it and that breaking
Hmm.
down of information.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can see that. I can imagine that. I mean, I always loved when teachers were really good at explaining stuff. You know, they'd say it in like a few different ways, and you're like, one of those
One of
catches
those
my,
cats,
yeah.
exactly. It's never one. And sometimes you're like, sometimes you get so excited about like showing something you just learned, and you go in and then you just have these blank faces and you're like, oh, that totally didn't work. Like, and then again, you have to adapt and switch and figure out a different way of presenting it. And yeah, so it's just, it keeps you on your feet.
Yeah, and that's such a skill as well to be able to adapt rather than to go, I don't know why you don't understand this. It's
Well,
like,
sometimes I'm
okay.
thinking that, but again, then that's the challenge, right? To then,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to talk to you about like something you suggested, which was like how we prepare students for a career in VFX, which is an interesting topic and something I talked recently with Terence Masson on. And I think it's such a pertinent subject, especially so the idea is, how do we engage students and get them um, to help prepare them for when they graduate to get jobs in the VFX industry. And the film production industry is changing a lot at the moment. Let's talk a little bit about how is the landscape for film production changing at the moment? Like, what ways do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think these are all things most people in this industry have heard. So I don't know if this is like
Mm.
groundbreaking new, but I do think the big things that sort of really shifted things in our industry is I do think real-time technology made a huge impact and is still proceeding to make a big impact. I think virtual production in general, right, made things uh, made us reevaluate like where our time goes, how we want to break down the pipeline, how we want to approach things, how we want to work on teams. And then, of course, I mean, the big catchphrase, AI, machine learning. I mean, it's here, it's happening,
Hmm.
it's changing things very quickly. Again, a lot of emotions around that and opinions around that. But say what you want, it is here, it is changing things, and we do have to like think about that. But the
Hmm.
other interesting point that, I think people sometimes don't talk as much about is just like software accessibility. Like I think that had a
Hmm.
huge impact on the industry, and especially students or people indies, right, that just want to learn. Before it was virtually impossible to do some of the CG stuff because the machines were so expensive and the software was
Yeah.
ridiculous. I mean, you literally couldn't, like when I was in school, no way, right? You could
Yeah, yeah. You either had to rip the software or like
exactly.
find
But
somewhere with access, right?
you have to find sort of your ways, right? But now it's like we have things like Blender, which is amazing software. I mean, look at the Oscar flow that just won, a lot of it done in
Hmm.
Blender. And then, of course, Unreal Engine, even things like Photoshop, you have Krita. I mean, you can pretty much find a software, DaVinci, right, for editing. I mean, like you can
Hmm.
almost recreate the pipeline on free software. And I think
Mm.
that's a really interesting impact. And I think students are starting to realize that they can build this pipeline of free software on their own time.
Yeah,
Motivating.
when did the software, like when did these free software start emerging? I know that sort of Unreal Engine, was it always free or did it use, because I remember that like when I started using Unreal Engine, there was
Yeah.
like Unity and Unreal Engine were two, and
Yeah.
one of them was free. I think maybe Unreal Engine was free or maybe Unity was. And so there was, you know, people went towards one of them, especially if you're starting out trying out a software, you're not going to fork out all the money for for the thing if you don't know. And then for students, it doesn't make any sense to make a software that people can't learn before they get into the industry because you need experience in the software to get the job in the
Right.
first place, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
enough about the history. I wouldn't be able to tell you the years of when what happened. No idea. But I mean, I think it was just kind of it's interesting because, software kind of comes and goes as well.
Mm,
That's just the fact. Like Softimage was huge. And then what was it, 2015, where like I never thought that would go away.
right.
Same thing with Alias, right, which kind of morphed into other things. So I mean, I think it's just kind of a flow. But
Hmm.
again, I think the shift is just that the accessibility of and to software that is now free. So and I think that was kind of a slow progression of things kind of like stacking
Yeah.
or more.
What interested you in real-time technology and like Unreal Engine? Like what made you get interested in that?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I mean, I was like, it was so off my radar because I was
Mhm.
in my little bubble working at Blue Sky Studios, which I was so, I was very happy at Blue Sky, and we were just working in the linear pipeline. It was all proprietary software, though. That was
Mhm.
always very interesting. So I was used to working in different ways that weren't that were kind of unusual for the industry. But
Mhm.
when Blue Sky was shut down, was closed, and everybody got laid off, it was a real big sort of turning point for a lot of us, and for me definitely. I was suddenly like, huh. I was sort of faced with a choice, like, do
Mhm.
I just continue doing what I've been doing for the last 20 years, which is just working in the CG pipeline, doing material, texture, lighting, whatever,
Mhm.
or do I take this opportunity and try something new? It was sort of a weird awakening for me where I was like, maybe this is the opportunity where I just do something totally different. And I really
Mhm.
was thinking totally different. I was like, maybe I want to be a writer, like for a beat, for a split moment. I was like, because again, it's like it's a weird shock to the system when you were so comfortable and you really enjoyed what you were doing, and then it's just kind of
Yeah.
ripped away. It's a very, very weird feeling, and you kind of like are floating a little bit. And again, I wasn't that young either when that happened. So
Mhm.
for me, I felt like going the same route, just working at another big animation studio, just didn't feel right. And I wanted to really explore what the other options were. And real time was kind of there, but I didn't really know much about it. And that is when some of the other Blue Skyers pointed out that there was this fellowship at Epic Games. So the Epic
Mhm.
Games at the time, well, they still do, they offered a fellowship where they, in 4 weeks, would teach you Unreal Engine. And at the time, they even had a stipend. So I was like, wait, they give me a stipend and they teach me like real
That's amazing. Yeah.
technology. And I get to make something and be creative. So I signed up for the program, really know nothing about it. I didn't know Unreal Engine at all, nothing. I went in and it was like boot camp for 4 weeks.
Yeah. Wow.
Every day you have live classes, and it was kind of different at the time, but it was, and it had a sense of community. So that's where I
Mm.
really learned real time. And as soon as I went through that program, it was a no-brainer. I'm like, well, this is the future. Like, it just made so much sense to me that I, who knew
Mhm.
nothing about modeling, knew or very little, not nothing, very little about animation, could make a short film, which it was rough, but still I could make
Mhm.
a short film in 4 weeks. Like, that was it.
Yeah.
Like that's the future. That's what I want to do.
Yeah. That's amazing. I think like I will say that Epic Games has made a really big concerted effort to like get different like to get artists from different fields. I had a very similar conversation. So you're talking about, filmmaking of VFX and similar conversation with game design. I spoke with this woman called Mafono, and she was like she had learned Unreal Engine to make games, and she sort of learned coding and was a professor of Unreal Engine as well. And I think that Epic Games are like, like having this kind of course where, they're encouraging people like you to be like, right, 4 weeks, learn it. And then you can also start using the you can take this software either if you're going to go into another, studio or if you're going to teach, like basically encouraging people to get into the software. Like I think that's
Yeah.
really, that was really smart that they were helping people learn it very quickly because suddenly everyone was learning Unreal Engine in
Yeah,
different
no,
fields, in architecture.
it was very clever, and it was actually kind of it was a project created originally by Brian Pohl. He was the one that really thought up and planned the original fellowships, and it was, my understanding is that it was created mainly out of a need of a reaction to COVID, because so many artists were out of work, and
Mm,
Brian Pohl was like, this would be a great opportunity for them to learn something new and keep them busy, and the company support uh, yeah, artists out of work. So
mm.
I still think that's such a beautiful, it's now totally different, but at the time I thought that was such a beautiful concept.
Yeah, yeah. And I also think the thing you were talking about being laid off from your job and having to decide what you're doing next is so relatable for so many people in different CGI industries. Because I had the same thing. At the same thing, I was laid off about sort of over a year ago from my job, and luckily I found a job that was quite similar. But I had different friends who were like, okay, should we learn something different? Because it wasn't just the economy, it was also the industry is changing, right?
Yes.
So the need for the thing that I was doing is now, slightly different. It's changing for different reasons. Like in ArcViz, it was people are hiring remotely, so then it's very difficult to
Mhm.
justify a salary doing the thing that we're doing. How do we do something different? But I think in VFX, like if you're not using real-time technology, maybe doing virtual production, it's smart that you decided, right, what's the future and what can I get into? Was that like a difficult thing, or was that just felt natural?
I don't know if it felt natural because, again, to be totally honest, I think if I was still at Blue Sky, I would have just kept doing my thing. And it's
Right.
funny, like although I really loved working at Blue Sky, it was an amazing company, and the culture was just really really great. And but at the same time, if I'm totally honest, I also was kind of bored. I was doing the same
Mm.
kind of work for years, and I could do, I could put on my headphones, I would have my TV show on, and I was doing my material work. Like it was
Yeah.
very comfortable, but
Right.
with almost a little bit boring. And for me, so it's such a weird thing because in some ways I still feel the loss of that company and the people that were there. But I also have to acknowledge that it was probably the best thing that happened to me in terms of my career and
Mm-hmm.
my sort of mental, sort of career growth. I think that was probably the best thing that could have happened because I was just kind of cruising along. I wasn't pushing myself very hard anymore. And again, when you're sort of thrown out into the streets and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
it really woke up that inner spirit that I used to have when I started out in the industry and I came out of school and I wanted to learn everything. I kind of didn't even realize I kind of lost that. And it kind of came back in like the vengeance. I wanted to learn everything and know how everything worked. And virtual production is such a great field for that mentality, that sort of hunger of knowledge and curiosity. And like I fully just jumped in and embraced that, and I wanted to really learn everything. And I just enjoyed that journey of like, what's this? Oh, how does that work? And how does that connect? And that made me, yeah, kind of grow in a whole nother. I mean, I say this a lot, it's funny when you come out of school and you make your career, and I thought I was all settled. I never in a million years thought at the age 50 would I start completely from scratch. Again, not
Mm.
just career-wise, but like mentally, like what am I doing? Where am I going? Like I never
Yeah.
ever thought that was going to happen because I started out as a intern at a company, and then I was like a general TD, and then I was a senior TD, and I was a lead TD, and like I went off the normal routes. So
Mm-hmm.
I kind of thought I was just going to keep going. So at 50,
Yeah.
when I suddenly that was all taken away, and I was really sort of faced with like, now do something, do the same thing. Do I
Yeah.
do or do something different? Like that was a really, really weird choice to have to make at my age, and not so yeah. I think that's but because there was all this new technology available where people are still learning, it was also kind of cool to jump in. Like
Mm.
nobody's really, really an expert in virtual production,
Yeah.
right? Like they're experts in certain areas, but everybody's still, even now, still kind of figuring out a lot of the things. So it's kind of a really fun time to jump in and just be like, how does this work? How are you doing it? How are you doing it? Oh,
I think it's great that like not the circumstances under which it happened, but that you had an opportunity to sort of awaken your creativity again. Because, it
yeah,
can be, like sort of getting comfortable in your job is like, there's like a double-edged sword, isn't it?
yeah.
It's sort of, it's nice to be comfortable and sort of put your
Mhm.
headphones on and not really think about what you're doing. But then if you're an artist at some point, you sort of, um, it's hard to leave that kind of job. So if you're forced to leave it and you suddenly get excited again, like, I really enjoy learning new software, and I feel like if I
Mhm.
can keep learning new software throughout my career, I'd be really happy. Um, but it does, because it keeps me on my toes, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is a new thing. We don't necessarily know everything about it. Let me try and find out. Um, so that's kind of cool. So I'm wondering if there's anything in that experience that you've had where you've had to sort of, switch career and stuff. Is there any of that you can like teach your students? Is there a way that you can use that experience to prepare your students for that might happen to you and this is what you should do?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely talk a lot to my students about this. I mean, I don't know if my career might be a little bit funky because looking back, even though I was at Blue Sky a very long time, my mentality was always like, what's that? I'm like a squirrel. What's that? I want to do that. Ooh, what are you doing? So when I came out of school, and I started out in New York, I was working in post-production, sort of advertising, doing, different, just post-production work. And I did that for a few years. And then somebody was like, oh, there's this medical animation company doing, medical animation. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of interesting. Maybe I want to try that. So then I did that for a few years. And then I went into animated feature films. So I like navigated the industry many times. So again, from advertising to medical animation, to animated feature films. And then I went into, Epic Games, which was mainly virtual production, really, but it's a game company, right? So I do tell my students that there is so much opportunity if you open yourself up to that, right? The problem is, like, especially on these sort of visual effects routes, we have this vision, like we feel, especially traditional in the linear pipeline, we kind of feel like this is the path, and then this is what I have to do, and then I want to be that, which is still good to have. I think it's good to have strong goals and sort of visualize who you really want to be in the ideal situation. But I think it's, especially nowadays, being a little bit more flexible and kind of understanding that there's really cool opportunities in not the obvious big company names that you're always sort of like, that's sort of the golden, where you want to end up at.
Yeah.
I think I'm trying to get my students to see beyond that a little bit more, that especially if you're learning. So I'm really focusing on having them learn transferable skills. That's really important to me. So even though they're taking a virtual production class, like, how does that translate into many other things? And with that, I have conversations around what are the other opportunities that you might want to look into, or right next to the ones that you are sort of heading towards. So not discouraging them, because I think big goals is still awesome, and that's sort of what drives you, but also being educated about the things that they now can do that maybe weren't even available to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And what do you think of the transferable skills? Can you talk about some of what you think they are?
Yeah, I mean, naturally, if you're learning things like real-time technology, right, those just naturally go into other skills. So or other disciplines, I should say. So before, again, if you're just like learning visual effects, you're kind of on this one track. But with real-time technology, because that is being used in automotive, VR, XR, animation, because it just naturally will open up more opportunities with that. So I think it's sort of like, just it's more an understanding of like that this tool can help you in other ways, and just being a little bit aware of how is the same tool that you're learning used in other ways, right? Sort of opening up that conversation to those other pathways, and a lot of it is just awareness. I mean, most people just don't understand how that's even possible, or again, how, but at the core, real-time technology just kind of opens up a lot of transferable skills. And transferable skills, when I say transferable skills, it's not just the software, but it's these soft skills that will assist, right? Will really assist whatever the software, because again, the software changes all the time. It will change again. So I also want them to understand that, like, working collaboratively, like, that's virtual production, right? That's real-time skills, like really understand, being able to communicate what you are doing, how you're doing it, why you're doing it. How does your work fit in the bigger pipeline? So just understanding what you have to do, but how does that really fit in and affect everything else, right? Like, those are all kind of, those are sort of more the soft skills that are really transferable and very important, but I think the students don't think about a lot, and often also schools that just don't really support. So how do you support that? Mostly, I think team projects is a very clear one, because you kind of have to practice all those skills naturally. But then if we want to get a little bit more specific, like if we want to get really specific, you could say, well, if you're an animator, maybe you should now know how motion capture also works, right? Like, that's a transferable skill. Like, you can still be a traditional animator, but you should have a good understanding of how the other thing works that sort of affects what you're doing. Same thing with modeling, right? You have traditional modelers, but it's probably a good idea now to also understand how to do photogrammetry and all those kind of tools that are now available to you. And same thing with AI. I mean, all this stuff, it's not you have to use AI, but you should be aware of how it's being used in your discipline, and you should probably understand, you should use it yourself. You should understand it, and then you can still make the choice. Do you want to use it or not? But you will then have that skill that, depending on X, Y company is using, you can then offer that as something you do understand, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. And I think that that's like more and more needed, right? Because the idea of having, I guess, going into an industry and then just slotting into a small part of a big production and just knowing this one thing is not necessarily how companies are going to be from now on, especially if, companies are changing. VFX studios are often closing and opening. I feel like that. I mean, that's happening now, but I feel like that has been happening over years, right? The same thing with video games companies, you
Mhm.
know. So I guess being a bit flexible in the kind of thing that you're learning, so you learn it in different ways, is so important. Do you find some students naturally just want to stick with one thing? Like, do you have to persuade them to be like, try this
Oh,
other stuff? Yeah.
I mean, it's so classic, that mindset, right? Because you're always comfortable with what you kind of learned
Mm.
first. That's often the case.
Yes.
So I'll have my students come into Unreal and they're like, oh my God. It's like, but the reality is it's just a mindset. I mean, it's like, yes, some
Mm,
things are easier there and some things are easier here. Like that's again, but it's just like software. It's just a mindset. Like the hardest thing is sort of trying to convince them that going into whatever the software is, just kind of letting go of everything you've known before and just using the tool as is, right? That's like, look at it more as just, this is the new tool I am now learning. And then I'm going to go over here and then I'm going to learn this tool. Then you will have sort of you're starting sort of from a neutral position, and you will
mm,
embrace the things that are there that are good. And you will of course notice things that aren't as good. But really you kind of, and the funny thing is when you work at companies, a lot of them have, proprietary software anyway. So it's
yep.
like this holding on to software and this is better than this. It's like such a weird mentality because it's not even realistic, I think, for most places. Like for instance, at Blue Sky, everything when I started was proprietary. Like I literally had to throw out, and it was all like script based and
Mm,
procedural. Like it was nothing like I had learned. So if I had compared that, I would have gone crazy to my old way of working. So again, I think that's sort of the future mentality has to be like being flexible again. But if you enjoy that learning process, it's not really a
mm.
problem, right? It's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a good thing.
I get frustrated too, right? When I have to go back and forth. It's not like I don't feel that as well, but you also acknowledge that it's just like that momentary, like, okay, I wish this was different shortcut, right? And then
Yeah,
you move
yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah.
It doesn't stop you from wanting to learn.
Yeah, I sometimes I feel like my best way of describing it when I'm learning a new software and it's like I know how to do this in this other software. I feel like someone's giving me oven gloves and saying like draw a picture, and you're like I know how to do it if I just take these off. But then when there's no better feeling of when you get over that little hump of like I think
So
I've got
good.
it. I know how to do it now, and now I know how to do it in different software. I was the same. I had a similar experience, and I started off my career working in video games for 6 years at Rockstar Game, and they had like scripted all of their, so we were using 3ds Max, but they had really customized it. They had, kind of coders who made these tools that made it very easy for artists to have all their shaders and everything. When I stopped working there and I was using like a regular version of 3ds Max, I was so confused. It's like, why, I have to make these materials look the same as someone had written it, and I realized I'd only learnt a very small, specific slice of skills, and I need to learn all those other ones to be able to do the thing myself,
Yeah.
which is really, once you learn how to do that, you can slot into anything.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Do you, so as part of the course at at like the course that you're teaching at Savannah College, like, do you have like in the curriculum or whatever, like different software use, or do you just try and throw different software at them and say, try these?
Well, it's a really good question, because like I'm really trying to be software agnostic, so kind of let them use
Yeah.
what they want. Having said that, of course, there's like industry standards, that are like happening right now. So I always try to preface my class, especially I'm teaching a virtual production class. I always preface it with like, look, right now, this is kind of like what we're seeing a lot, right? So just because that's the reality. So it's good to be aware of like what's being used and where. So in my class, virtual production, it is mostly Unreal Engine, because I do feel like that's just where we're at right now. But I do also tell them that might totally change. Who knows? But having said that, though, what I really like to do is, so even though Unreal Engine is sort of the foundation of what we're using to create the content, and you know, the whole class is kind of evolving around that, I always let them use whatever they want with it. So that's a really interesting thing. And I'm like, listen, if you want to use Blender, go right ahead. You want to use Maya, I don't care. Like, as long as the most of the work and the final product is coming out of Unreal, I don't care how and they can even do the post work with whatever they want, right? Just the core of the work is an Unreal Engine, but everything around that, I really try to encourage them actually a lot to use other stuff and find. So some use Gaia for like a landscape, you know, because they like it. Again, some still use Maya to bring things in. A lot of them are using Blender because it's so accessible. So it's, and I really, really enjoy that, because first of all, I notice it makes them feel a little bit more comfortable, because they don't feel like they're being forced into anything. Because I'm like, no, if you really want to use that, you want to do the modeling over there, fine, bring it in, and then let's talk about it. I do show them how to do everything, modeling and a little bit of very little animation in that class, but a little bit of everything, right? But so because I want them to be aware that it's there as well. But by all means, you know, if it's faster and you can be more creative, I mean, like, and same thing with AI. Like, if they want to use that for brainstorming, reference material, just kind of like feel things out, I'm like, do it. You know, this is what's available to you. I want you to use as much as possible. But then the big thing is, I want them to really understand why. I'm going to pause here. I want them to understand, why are they using that? So while I allow them to use whatever they want, as a matter of fact, I encourage them. I always, at the end of the group projects, I have them write documentation on what they used and why they used it and how they used it and what was the challenges and what were the results. So they have to sort of write a report about the process, right? Because this is what's missing. People just kind of do it at a comfort level. And I want to change their mindset from comfort level to intent. So while you have all these things available, why are you using that? And how is this actually making it better? Did it actually make it better? You know what I mean? Like, I think that's where it gets really interesting in the classroom, those conversations around like what worked. And same thing, like I didn't even let them I was just like, source control, use it if you want. If not, you have to figure out how to share your projects, you know, with your teammates. And it was so interesting, like, and I kind of gave them a list of things that they could do, right? Like the using version control or whatever, multi-user, right? Like that was another, and it was so interesting because some of them just figured it out. Some of them ended up using GitHub. Some of them used multi-user setup. Others just brute force that migrated. But I love that experimentation. And again, like, and then they had to talk about like what worked and what was like a failure or challenge, I should say. I never see anything as a failure. It's more as like just going and pivoting, right? Everything's about pivoting. You hit a wall, move. Hit a wall and move.
That's so smart, because you're really like, I guess you're encouraging people to use that muscle of interrogating their decisions, because then that's where you know, if you know, every time you ask yourself, am I using the best technique for this? Am I using the best software for this? Am I doing this in the best way? Like, I feel like I'm going to take that away with myself too and be like, why am I using this? You know, asking yourself why.
And what made it better? Or did it really make it better? Or were you just more comfortable? You know, like, did it really speed up the process? And the other really cool thing about that was I would then, because they kind of worked differently, the different groups, they would come and report back to the class. So it also became sort of the soft skills came back in, right? Where they were like, so you used multi-user, what was great? They were like, well, this was really great. Like you could work in it at the same time. But then when we were at home, it didn't work at all. You know, like, so that the reporting back and sort of reiterating the internal process to the rest of the classes is a whole exercise that I found was very useful and made them come out of their shell a little bit too.
One final topic I'd like to just quickly ask you about is you started Women in Real Time group, which you invited me to, and it's like an
Yeah.
amazing set of different women in slightly different fields, which is really interesting. Tell me a bit about that. Why did you start it?
Yeah, it's so funny because like when I first started, I wasn't really thinking like, oh, it's going to be a women's group. I just, noticed that in real-time technology, again, it's like automotive, it's VR, it's XR, we
Mm.
have virtual production, we have animation. And I just thought that was so cool by going through different events, that having just all these different people that you could sort of interact with and learn things from. So that's kind of how it initially started. But then I was thinking, there is sort of a comfort level, right, when you are when you're among as a woman being among women, and they do have kind of bring a different perspective to the table sometimes, and I
Mm.
did predominantly work with men in industry. That's just how it still is. I mean, it's gotten so much better for sure, but like I remember my
Yeah.
first company, I was like the only woman doing CG at all, and then in
Yeah, right.
technical animation, same thing, and even at Blue Sky when I first started. So it's like I was quite used to that. So it is, you do have different conversations. And I was like, well, I
Hmm.
think this will be really interesting. Let's see if how many women I can get together. But the other thing is, I didn't want to just make a big group because, there's amazing organizations like the Women in Animation. There's a lot of really, really good women's groups that already exist. I really wanted it to be in New York and small and very diverse. So we really could have like very interesting conversations. So what I was
Yeah.
looking for was also differences in age. So I was really looking for women who had just graduated, right, barely started in industry, and then women who had been working in industry for 40 years. And then, of
Yeah.
course, like you said, I thought it'd be really cool to bring people to the table also from accessibility, and then the more obvious things that you think of like animation, mocap, and
Yeah.
architects. I thought that would be a good one. And so really just different backgrounds, different disciplines, but different ages. That's I
Yeah.
think where it got really interesting, because that's, you just have a different perspective if you're just out of school versus someone in the industry who's been there a long time. So I wanted it to be small. I wanted it to be super diverse. And then I kind of just wanted to see what happens. I mean, I
Yeah.
did, of course, think it would be super cool to just learn new skills, right? Have like workshops and give some lectures. Like, here, this is what I do and this is my process. But it's funny because it went from a sort of more technical workshop uh, format to really more a support group where we would get together and be like, what's going on? Like, what do you see?
Yeah.
How are you doing things? And then me just learning something about, like, again, accessibility is one of the most interesting fields for me because it's so, you don't see it happening.
What's accessibility? What is
Oh,
that
like
exactly?
anything like making technology accessible to people that have,
Oh,
disabilities.
yes.
So a simple example, like making the interface for colorblind people,
Mm.
being able to change the interface for colorblind people. Like it's how
Yep.
to implement that. And I think that's a really interesting area that technology
Yeah.
just, obviously extremely powerful, but I don't know much about. So I thought, yeah, so these kind of conversations is I learned something and I think about something differently. And I really, really enjoyed those conversations. But that was really the idea. It's just like, how do we locally bring people from very different backgrounds and have you just think differently about something, or you just learn something new.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I think there's a little bit of element of like the reason why I started doing this podcast is also because I just really love having conversations with people who are
Mhm.
doing slightly different things to me in a very kind of there's a similar field, but like different points of view and different backgrounds of experience because I love that. I think you can learn so much from people who have done different things to you. And to put yourself in that situation, because like you were describing a little bit, we know you worked at Blue Sky for 18 years, and so you were sort of comfortable. Like you're probably working around, you're used to all the different people who you're working with too. And to like, sometimes you find, wait, how can I get into rooms and conversations with people who are a little different to me, but also want to talk to me about what they're doing? So I think that, I guess that's one of the great things about community, sort of artistic communities in that sense. Have you always been drawn to like communities, sort of,
It's such
career
a,
wise?
it's such an interesting question because it's like I'm laughing because I'm such an introvert. People don't realize that I'm really an introvert. I can hunker down in my apartment and never leave and just work on my stuff, right? Or learn new things. I mean, that's the danger of like virtual production. You can kind of just do it in in a cave.
Yeah.
a little bit. But what I realize, what I know is, it's just really healthy to be a part of a community, and to really grow, you kind of have to be part of a community, because again, if you go down this tunnel vision, yeah, I can be at home and just kind of learn on my own, but it's that the group mentality is where you get that different, like that aha moment, or that, oh
Mm.
man, I think I was just wrong. Sometimes I'm just wrong about something, or they just make me think deeper. They sort
Mm.
of, community makes you sort of reevaluate sometimes your stance, or makes you think beyond that, or again, sort of like makes you, holds you responsible almost sometimes for
Yeah.
decisions you make, right? And I and also just to know, and where it raises awareness, right? Like you can see more of the world that affects you, or that you might affect by your decision making. So while I'm sort of more inclined to just be in my little space, I recognize, and I love community for that growth that it brings.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I totally agree. I've been finding that more and more recently as well, with communities, and my mind being able to expand and not just being in the sort of small bubble that I know. One
Yeah.
final question, going back to students and preparing them for getting into careers, do you have any other advice that we haven't talked about for any students who are going into the world of filmmaking, VFX, virtual production, trying to get into industry now?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it still holds. It's like, I think you have to be really curious, really. Like, I encourage everybody to be curious. And the reality is, you got to work really hard. Like, I think people don't realize, like, the people that make it are the ones that work really, really hard. They like kind of live and breathe it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't
Hmm.
have a work-life balance, right? Like, just let's just preface that. But beyond that, the reality is, you really got to live and breathe this stuff. You got to love this stuff, and you got to kind of do it all the time, and you kind of got to push yourself beyond, again, your comfort level. So I mean, I know that seems obvious, but that's kind of the thing that I sometimes see lacking, is that sort of hunger and drive to what is the future look like? What is the future you? Who is the future you? Like, I encourage my
Hmm.
students to really think about, who is the future you? Like, what is the main goal that you're trying to hit? And then it's like, how do I get there? And you got to put all your effort into that, right? It's like you have to be a lifelong learner. It doesn't go away, that just because you're in school, you're like, oh, thank God, I can't wait till I'm done with school so I'm like can start working and do my thing. But it's like, in virtual production and these real-time technologies, it's like it changes constantly. Like, you're never ever going to stop learning. So you better embrace that learning mentality. So
Hmm.
that's sort of the core, is like, you have to have that drive. And again, it seems obvious, but it's lacking a lot of times. So you have to have
Hmm.
that drive, that passion for it. And then you got to always ask yourself why, right? Like, why am I learning this tool? Like, why is this helping me? And you know what I mean? Kind of break down, not just blindly doing things or following things, like really do things with intent. I think
Yep.
will also be helpful. So think about workflow, and how does this again fit in the bigger picture of what I'm going to be do? Being collaborative. I think that I'm always encouraging students to, again, if you can be collaborative through a group project, or collaborative even online, right? There's lots of possibilities to connect and learn together. And then in the end, it still comes down, you got to have good work, right? Like,
Yep.
you got to show, and not just, so build a good portfolio still means a lot, and it's still kind of everything in terms of first step, but show the process, right? Don't just make something and be like, that looks cool. Like, show the process again. What is, like, show how you got there. What was the thought process, and why did you
Hmm.
do that, right? Make that very evident in your work. Yeah, and then
Oh,
again,
this is amazing.
keep learning and stay curious is what ultimately, like, you have to have the portfolio. You want to be collaborative, but keep learning and stay curious is what will make you get there eventually, if it doesn't happen right away, right? Because most
Yeah.
people don't just send out the portfolios and they get lucky. It's that persistence. Oh yeah, and one more point on that too is, like, you got to have good work, you got to have good communication skills, but also you got to be proactive, right? You really got to be
Mm-hmm.
proactive and get out there. But what's so amazing is you have access to so many things now, right? You can find the people that you
Yep.
need to kind of get in touch with, the companies. Look for the recruiters on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is great. I tell all my students you should.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's work. It really is professional. Find the recruiters, contact them, show them your work. You know, you gotta have
Yep.
hunger and drive to then get your work out there. And it doesn't always happen right away. But if you just keep doing that, it's going to happen like at some point somewhere.
Yeah.
And again, if you're willing to pivot sometimes a little bit too, right? Now the boundaries being blurred, games, cinematics, all that stuff is like there's now other opportunities. So stay open to what those are and go for it.
Yeah. This is amazing. There's so many gems of advice that you gave, and I love your energy, Diana. You're so enthusiastic. I feel like I
Love
wish
it.
all my teachers have had the same energy as you.
But I really do. I mean, I really, for teachers, my advice is you really got to teach by example. You know, like if
Mhm.
you're telling your students, hey, you're lifelong learners, if you're not doing it yourself, it's pretty unmotivating.
Yeah, yeah, I
Like,
can see what you mean. Yep.
it's just like parenting by example, right? It's like it's not the same thing, but it kind of is. It's like you kind of got to show them how you're active in the community, how you're doing things, how you're reaching out, right? It's sort of, if you're telling them they're lifelong learners, you kind of got to show that. I mean, not everybody feels that way.
Mm.
I feel like that's the best influence.
Yeah, no, I think that that's really excellent advice. And given everything that, like, like all the challenges people face now and in the industry that they always have, I think that's excellent advice. Um,
Oh,
Thank you so much, Diana. Yeah. Oh, you had another one?
sorry,
Go.
one last thing I also want to
Yes.
acknowledge though with teachers is I do want to acknowledge that it is exhausting, by the way. I do think sometimes teachers don't get valued enough for the amount of effort and, teaching by example, what that toll
What
that
that
can
means.
take. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I do want to also acknowledge that it is a lot of work, and teachers don't get paid as much as industry folks. I think people don't realize
Right.
that. And they don't get paid that much, and they're working all the time, and they're probably doing it because they love it. So I
Right.
just want to give a shout out to all teachers because I know it is tiring, at times, and sometimes you just want to do the thing that you've always done. But I think, again, all of us are in it because we really do love this field. Otherwise, you wouldn't be a teacher.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, definitely a big shout out to all the teachers. Yeah. We need we need them. We need teachers. We need them to get paid more for sure. I don't know how I mean, I have no idea
I'm still figuring that
how that happens. Um, but I'm glad that at least your students are very lucky to have you
I
give
love it.
them the teaching advice and teaching that you're doing, so it's amazing. Um, yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I feel like I mean, I'm aware of the time. I feel like I could talk to you for like another hour. I mean,
Oh, I love this
um,
stuff. So anytime.
brilliant. I'd love to have you back on the podcast. We can talk about one of the other many subjects, also kind of do a deep dive into some of the things in virtual production. We kind of just skipped
I
on it a
know.
little bit, but I think virtual
Yeah.
production is so interesting and I've been talking about it a bit more, and maybe we can do a deep dive another time if you want to come back.
Anytime, Michelle.
That was another really exciting podcast. Thank you so much to Diana for coming on and imparting all of her knowledge and most of all the enthusiasm. I would just love to have had a teacher as enthusiastic as her, and I think her students are super lucky. I think we can all take away a lot of advice from the stuff that she talked about, and yeah, prepare students better for getting into industry. Really exciting. Thank you again for everyone listening. If you got this far, I'm really grateful. Please feel free to like and subscribe and, follow the podcast. Go back to previous episodes. There's a lot of really cool episodes of different people I've chatted to in the last 2 seasons as well. And, share this with anyone who you think might find it interesting. And until then, I'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.